there, it's Christine Nielsen, aka Coach C, and we have our first reboot session of the Coach C podcast. I have brought the Coach C podcast back because I think that it's a time for us to communicate powerfully and really hear a lot of what people, what business owners, what leaders, what are they dealing with, how are they doing, and what problems are they solving for their companies, what solutions are they providing. My very first reboot podcast, I'm super excited today because we have Mr. Trevor Botkin, who is the vice principal, who's the vice president of Corporate Connections Canada. And I met Trevor late last year, and it was instantaneous connection. Trevor is a people person. He connects people with their ideas, their passion. And I'm not someone who loves networking events and goes to a lot of networking events. I really actually avoid them when I can. And immediately, Trevor showed me a side of belonging to a community of business owners that I didn't even realize existed. I'm super excited to have Trevor as our first guest on the Coach C podcast, on the rebooted Coach C podcast. And we're going to talk today about a lot of different things. We have so many things to cover today. But Trevor, please tell us a little bit more about you and what you're up to.
I think I just want to let you continue talking about me because it's far more interesting coming from you than it ever would be from me.
What I just heard.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here to do your first reboot podcast from isolation with the rest of Canada, all hunkered down in our homes. Yeah, it's funny that you talk about not liking networking when that's basically my job. I run an executive networking organization that spans Canada. We're part of a global network, and I hate networking. So
it's so ironic. Both of us hate networking.
Yeah. I'm what you call a completely extroverted introvert.
I am too.
So yeah, so it's I think kindred spirits in that sense. So no, I have members across the country, and these are wild times for each and every one of us. On a global scale, is looking at no one knows where we're going, no one knows how we're going to get there, and the only kind of encouraging thing is we're all in the same boat. So it's exciting. It's exciting times for many, and I think not the least of which is the challenges of working from home full time. And I know you've got kids. I've got a 7-year-old, and homeschooling. Yeah, it's a fun challenge these days.
Yes, and now both you and your wife are working from home together right now. How are you finding that challenge? Because for the first time, my husband is also working from home today, and he worked from home last Friday, and it's very different. It's a whole new world having your entire family home and trying to work. What are you facing?
Well, my wife, she's an optimization coach, so she helps companies optimize their talent and more from like a COO function. So her business kind of dried up overnight, and people aren't right now looking for those types of coaches or the executive consultants coming in and doing that. And I know you're sensitive to that as well. So she and my business went completely virtual overnight. We saw this coming back in January. Our CEO globally saw the writing on the wall. And so for 6 weeks leading up to the lockdown, we were already looking at how do we take all our in-person meetings and move them to a virtual format, seeing that our members more than ever would need each other, would need the community, and we need access to opportunities, to guidance, to sometimes it's just having someone else listen to you and being able to kind of spill your guts on what's going on. And not have solutions, but someone just saying, yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah. So we were able to very quickly pivot and go from in-person meetings to virtual meetings overnight. And I think we're probably one of the biggest Zoom license holders on the planet right now.
Yes, because you have people all over the globe doing the exact same thing we're doing right now, which is being face-to-face, connecting. And one of the things that I'm finding with my clients, and my business didn't go in that direction. My business is actually, there's more of a demand for our consulting services and coaching because people really are looking at what are the opportunities and how do I make this pivot? And they're looking for solutions to solve their problems and also bring down a level of stress. So often
Yeah.
our clients are dealing with heightened levels of stress. They may never have worked from home before. Their companies are now disbanded. How do they create that engagement? How do they create cohesive culture, which is exactly what you're doing with Corporate Connects and the entrepreneurs and business leaders across Canada and across the world. And I'm finding more and more people are appreciating more of the raw and authentic conversations that we're having now. So it's almost even, let's just cut to the chase and forget the niceties.
Yeah.
Let's dig into what are some of the things that we're facing and what are the challenge of not only running a business from home, but having so much uncertainty in the marketplace about those businesses. So I know this morning and this week you're connecting with business owners and leaders all over Canada. You were saying you were on calls this morning at really early hours with BC and other places. So tell me what is it that people are reaching for? What is it that if you could distill it down, what is it that there is top of mind?
I think everyone's different. Every business is different. We know some businesses are actually going to do very well in this environment. If you're in the medical space, if you're logistics, transport, if you have anything to do with food sales, if you own stock in Sobeys or Loblaws, you're doing very well right now. If you have a toilet paper company, you're very happy. So it really depends on the industry. Our friends, our colleagues that are in the financial industry who are considered urgent services or are still working, still going to the office, this is very stressful. And they're watching portfolios, they're watching their clients lose their business or lose, amassed wealth overnight and drops that are that. And so that's stressful there, and how they deal with that is their own thing. So, and everyone's turning them to saying, what do I do? Is this a time, do I sell? Do I hunker down? Do I hide? What do I do with cash do I have? Is this a good time to be buying? Is this, what should I do with my mortgage? So anyone in the real estate's being asked that, is this a time for me to should I be talking to the bank about, mortgaging? Should I be taking the loans the banks are giving out? What should I do with my employees? Is it better for me to keep my employees and cut their pay, or set them up with employment insurance? Like, what's the best benefit for them? Should I be paying my rent? Should my tenants be paying their rent? And those are the questions I think all of us have. And then, normally I think we're pretty good at answering those and handling some of those. But then we couple that with our stress of being at home and sharing parenting duties and walking the dog in the middle of the day and all of those things. And, who has the kid, and, all of these things that we've never had to deal with, we're seeing, cracks in our that. So you're right. The social veneer is the first thing to drop. You think twice about asking how people are, unless you really want to know how they are, because a lot of us will go, whoa, it's rough. And so I have a lot of conversations with my members across the country just to find out how they are. And that's the joy of my job. It's also some of the weight that I carry is, when I talk to a member whose spouse has lost their job. And we had a lot of casualties that first week, and certainly the second week when 1.5 million Canadians applied for employment insurance. We certainly saw that within our community, where a lot of our members, their spouses or their kids were affected negatively in that. So I think we're all looking at it differently in terms of what the business opportunities are. And the questions or the discussions that I'm seeing is, okay, so we're in the situation we're in. The markets will do what the markets are going to do, and they'll continue to fluctuate. There's no indication that we've hit bottom. Is it going up? Maybe. Is it going down? Maybe. So we just assume it'll fluctuate for a bit. There's certainly a lot of, I think, help and plans from the government. Some of those are very promising. Some of them, we don't know how long they'll last or how deep they'll go. Well, some companies won't qualify right away, certainly on the 75% wage coverage. There's certain things that you have to do to be able to qualify for that. And some members, it'll be months before they qualify because they're not going to see the hit, but they'll see the hit in 3 months. So a lot of the discussions become not how do we survive, but how do we come out of this stronger than going into it? and
Yes.
where did those opportunities lie? And I think coming out of this, we're going to see a real shift in our culture, in especially in workplace. We've got a lot of employees who, when given the opportunity to either, take a lower pay to keep the company going and go on to employment insurance, took the employment insurance,
Yes.
and are sitting at home, Netflixing, and aren't doing anything of, and that's tough. That has its own stress when you're sitting there and cooped up in a house and not being productive or feeling like you have a purpose.
Yeah, and let's dig into that a little bit, because I think a lot of my clients are feeling the same, and the ones that, some of my clients chose not to furlough and not to
Okay.
give that as an option, and so they're taking pay cuts. They're not, and they're making sure that from the bottom of, their rungs to the top, the ones that are getting paid first are the ones that are on the bottom up
Yeah.
to the hierarchy, and they're not taking pay, because they want their employees and their teams fully engaged and
Yeah.
solving problems that the business currently has, and digging into solving those things, and how can they change that, and what culture can they create moving out of that. That, to me, speaks volumes of some of our leaders and some of those teams. And then you have the exact opposite, where when given the option, people going, I'll just ride it out at home. I'll take a pass. I'll get EI, and it'll all work out. But the reality of that is, now they've created problems for themselves emotionally. They
Yeah.
lack that sense of purpose. They lack that sense of structure, and there's a lot of damage when you do that. And then the on the polar side of that, the employer that has, the employee chose to take the EI versus digging in, there's going to be a lot of really valuable talent that
Yeah.
becomes available.
Yeah.
And those employers, if given a choice, who are you going to stack up when you get back to work, right? So you may have just not only chosen unemployment, but do you have a job to go back to because you made that choice?
And I think, yeah. So there's a couple things to unpack there. I think the first thing is it truly is a sign of leadership if your employees are willing to take a pay cut to stick it out with you. And I think that speaks volumes to the management team, to the owner, to whomever made that decision, where people saying, no, I'm going to invest in you, or I'm going to bet on you more than I'm going to bet on employment insurance and writing that out. So I think the employees who may say, no, you know what, I'm going to take EI, that speaks to probably a management team that maybe didn't do a very good job of engaging their employees in the first place, or the employees didn't have a sense of purpose already at work. So for them, there wasn't a loss, or, they were shuffling paper and they were biding their time in that. So I think coming out of this, you're right. There's going to be a huge market for skilled labor, for people. Um, you know, I have a member who's in recruitment and they do executive search recruitment. And there's a lot of executives right now who are looking at, when this all changes, do they stay with the company they're at? Do they take a new job? And I think everyone's kind of in a wait and see mode, which means there's going to be a very, very competitive market when we come out of this. And it's not necessarily who's in the best position, but who can react the quickest to the new realities of our economy and our society when we come out of this. Because this isn't just an economic hit that we saw in 2008. We've never seen anyone I've talked to is like, yeah, we've been here before. Anyone who's done their homework and is looking at it from a historical aspect and saying, this isn't 18, this isn't 1920, this isn't 1929, it's not 1931, it's not, it's not the 70s, it's not that, it's a mix of all of them. And then in none of those instances, even in 2008, we didn't have social media.
Yeah.
We didn't have communities that are this tightly woven around access to information. And the problem is, a lot of the information is speculative or completely wrong, or in that. And so I think more than ever, it's important for us as leaders to band together and say, how do we share best practices, not from I read this, but this is what I'm doing, this is what's working. I applied for this. This is what my banker told me, and this is what I'm able to get as a deal. Because the more information we have, I think the less powerless we feel. And part of the fear that we feel, part of the fear that employees feel, is the unknown. And in a vacuum, we fill in the gaps. And unfortunately, social media is very quick to fill in those vacuum gaps where, be it on, does gargling hot water kill the virus? And, medical, they're like, that's not how viruses work. Right. Now we know vitamins, we know exercise, we know sleep are all ways to keep yourself, in better shape, and that viruses tend to not react to somebody who's in great shape versus somebody who's run down and exhausted and emotionally tired. We know that that's pretty simple. In the same way, a business that's in good shape, where you have employees who are engaged, where you're not over leveraged with the banks, where you don't have a weird sort of ratio of receivables where you've delivered way too much and not recovered enough. Those will weather this better than companies that are speculative or that have kind of leveraged high debt loads and it's a gimmick or a flash in the pan. So we know that we'll all kind of, as organisms, our fragility is based kind of on the house we built going into this.
I agree. And a lot of companies were caught completely unprepared.
Radically unprepared for this.
And even myself, I was not prepared in the way that I would have loved to have been prepared for such a fast shift.
Yeah.
And so lessons learned, and what can I do differently, and how can we build resiliency, not only with the people, like with the leadership, with ourselves, and looking at ourselves as the source of that, and understanding how can we help each other, and how can we build out of this, and what are we learning as we go, because there is no playbook. You said it.
Yeah.
This has never happened in time. And I think you touched on something so important. We have access to global information. We have never had this much touch point and communication and information coming at us. And it's very challenging to sift out the facts and what's real. And, somebody will take the exact same report and change one thing, and it shifts the entire context.
Mm-hmm.
So people are responding to that. Or they take another piece, same report, same information, and change the storyline, and they respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are more and more mistrusting what information they make relevant and how they use that information. And hopefully there's you see the bandwagon jumping and the this and the that, but I think people are mistrusting the information as well.
Well, I think that's part of the fallout of the last 4 years that we've seen. I won't get political, but certainly in the last 4 years, where we've seen an increase in the rate of things being called fake news. And that's not to say that there haven't been news articles and things that are erroneous or that are fake or that are intentionally misleading to sell things. But where we've been hammered with this for years now. And now we're all a little bit distrustful of the news on either side. Be it liberal, be it right wing, and for good reason. I think that's when it's important to kind of band together as a community of business leaders to say, let's take opinion and push that out, and let's take conjecture and push that out, and let's talk about experience and saying, this is what I'm doing and I'm seeing positive gain, or this is what I did in 2008 and this is what I wish I had done differently. And the more conversations we have around that, and the more we have executives in these groups, and I know YPO does a great job with their forums at leveraging that. EO does the same thing as us, and it's something that we believe is important for our members to say, not because you read it in a book, not because you watched a YouTube video, but because you yourself have lived that experience and can say, this is what I would do differently.
Yes.
Or this is what I am going to do this time because I've learned that lesson. Then you can look at that and with your own experience and your own intellect and go, that's true to me. And the rest I'm going to kind of leave there as maybe I want to look at that, but it doesn't really resonate with me, or 100% that resonates with me. And I think that's more important than, I was talking to a business leader the other day, one of my members, who is like, I limit my news to about half an hour a day. And I don't, after that, I want to know what's happening locally. I want to know if they've shut down the city. I want to know if there's roadblocks. And after that, I leave it because it's too negative, and it's there to sell a certain agenda. And some news are more biased than others, but generally speaking, there's an agenda at play because most of our news outlets are owned by for-profit companies. And that's the reality of what we live in. And then they have their network of trusted people, and a lot of them have great executive coaches that are sounding boards that are able to do that. And some of us are fortunate to have spouses that we can run things by and say, what do you think about this? And they're able to give their, and I'm fortunate in that sense that I do have that, and I have an incredible partner in that sense. But I think more than ever, it's important to be very choosy and very picky in the sense of saying, surround ourselves by people smarter than us, more successful than us, who are more entrepreneurial than us, who are more fearless than us, even if they're not, if we think they are, and try to if this was the Titanic, we want to make sure that we're in lifeboats that are full of people who are going to inspire us, because we're in that lifeboat for a while. And I think globally, we're all in the same lifeboat, and we have to be, picky and choosy about, making sure there aren't people there who just want to sit there and watch us row the boat and wait for it to all blow over and say, no, like pick up an oar and let's work together to get through this.
You said so many key things in there. One, community, surrounding yourself with people who are sharing experiences and trying to solve problems.
Yeah.
Trying to come up with solutions. And it's regardless of how big the problem is or how small the problem is, let's solve those things together through sharing experiences and understanding how to create that connection from a social distance right now. Because
yeah.
sit in the room together and share lunch together, but we can certainly come together and have the conversations that are impactful. And I think you're seeing more and more people being willing to have impactful conversations like the one we're having right now.
Well, they don't, I don't think there's an option. I think it forces us, it takes the artifice of thinking just because we're in the same room with someone that we have a relationship.
Yes.
And how many of us have coworkers that we don't really know, but we're like, oh, I know them. I go to work with them every day. I share the same seat next to them on the bus. And until you sit down and you're in this truly artificial moment of, I'm looking at my computer screen, looking at you, you're in Toronto, I'm in Montreal. Part of it was always the danger of social media and the internet, the anonymity, that people could post and say whatever they wanted. And it became very, very destructive and vile. But at the same time, we can use that to say, we can have these closed down chats. We can go into a Zoom call and I can see you and you can see me, and we can say things and just open it up. And I think as long as we have that agreement that vulnerability will be protected and that we're all kind of supporting each other. And even though, as a husband, I always want to have the solutions, but I've learned that sometimes it's better just to shut up and listen than to try to offer a solution. That was the hardest lesson probably of my marriage.
Yes. When I work with couples, and I do work with a lot of couples in business, I really work with them on stay in your lane. Not every problem for you to fix.
And that's a challenge. But I think, if we all understand that sometimes just, I was on a call with a whole bunch of different business leaders, and someone said they were having trouble sleeping. And I stopped them. I said, anyone else on this call having trouble sleeping? And almost every hand was like, yeah, I'm not sleeping well at night. And I think a lot of us are if we're sleeping, it's restless, or the dreams, or, there's a lot of anxiety. And so the minute you do that, everyone's like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. Everyone else is struggling too. And that instantly is enough for a lot of people to go, okay, I can keep going. I can manage. And when someone says, I just had to let go employees, and you stop the room and say, okay, anyone else let go of people today? And then everyone puts up their hand. You're like, okay, so I'm not evil, or I'm not a bad leader because I had to let people go. And I think there's no, like we can say, there's no right way to get through an epidemic. I think there's some wrong ways to do it. I think the people who are hoarding supplies and then marking it up and selling it on Kijiji or things like that, those are some of the worst our society has to offer. in terms of like a capitalist sort of like, I'm just being a capitalist. Um, but so one thing we started in our community was the CC Canada Cares, which was, we're all in shared WhatsApp channels, and we were looking at how do we, some of us are quite privileged and have homes and have kids and have food and have access to food. And, there's a lot of at-risk people here in Canada that need help and don't have a voice or have lost that voice in the last couple of weeks. Be it women that are stuck at home with abusive husbands and there's no more shelters. They're all closed. Families that don't have access to food, and the food banks are closing.
Yes.
Kids who don't eat unless they go to school, and we close the schools.
Yeah.
And so, something is sorry.
There are the real problems that a lot of our communities, business owners, entrepreneurs are working together.
Yeah.
Find solutions by, number one, identifying, shedding light on the problem.
Yeah.
Right. So unless you know it's a problem and you're sharing the problem, you can't find the solutions. Right.
But I think it also it elevates us from a place of like, oh, this is happening to me, to going, okay, this is happening, I can deal with this. But there's people out there in our country that are their babies are literally starving, and I go, I can take $50, I can take $100, I can take $1,000. It won't break me. But how many people is that like the difference between life and death?
Yes.
And we're at that point in some of our communities. And we've always been that way. If you look at the numbers on how many people die from hunger a year, it's staggering. Like, the numbers are atrocious. If we look at the global refugee crisis, I think it's 70 million people are displaced right now. And so, if anything, I think this is an opportunity to start looking at, what do we want to do as a society? How do we want to live? What's sustainable? And these are questions that on the left, they've been screaming about for a long time, but many of us kind of sit center, maybe socially left, fiscally right, but it's still kind of center. But these are the discussions I think that are exciting right now to look at it and going, well, since we've completely hit the pause button on our economy and all these things, and we're all reevaluating our jobs, our lives, some of us, I think there's a lot of people looking at their spouse and going, these are tough times. These should also be part of the discussion, is how do we do that? So, we've been contacting refugee families here in Montreal that have left war-torn countries, that have left abusive families and whatever, and have made their home in Canada, and just reaching out, what do you need? And how do we help? And giving
In CC Cares, and people
Yep.
can, once they've listened to the podcast, and you can reach out to us at Contrast, and we'll connect you with some of the families as well if you want to put together some support. Because within hours, we had a member of our CC community just send from it their Amazon Prime, the diapers, the food, what that family needed, and it really was. It was click a button, and that family's getting what they need for support fairly quickly. And those are the small acts of heroism.
Well,
Right?
I think, I think the minute you give somebody something that they can be causative over, it kind of lifts the spirit or a little bit, or it lifts the tone of that person of saying, okay, so it's not all gloom and doom, and we're not screwed, and I'm not just sitting here in my house hiding and playing Uno with my kids. I can actually bring help to people who they don't, or they're terrified to leave the house. So
One of the sciences behind how our brain works, and when you give people a higher sense of purpose,
yeah,
a higher sense of value, it elevates everything immediately. So it shifts them from being a victim of the circumstances to actually being a cause in the matter. And it's those acts of heroism, whether it's the nurse saying, no, I'm not going to work unless you supply me with a mask and
right,
safe equipment, or it's helping that family. You're seeing more and more acts of that, where we're all banding together, being a community, and helping in some small or big way.
yeah,
And it was funny because I had a conversation with someone who's in Seattle about 2 weeks ago, because in Seattle, one of the largest at-risk populations is their homeless population, and a very high population in San Francisco and Seattle of homelessness, and they are at risk. Even if the rest of us are on quarantine, how do we make sure that these people are also getting the care and being in quarantine? And I said, well, if you have such a problem, what about the hotels that have empty rooms? why aren't we having, this be the opportunity to quarantine people and help with establishing, because if we're not all quarantined, then this isn't going to work.
And we've done it for nothing. Like, we've crashed our economy. And that's the thing I see. If you're going to the park and you're playing soccer on Saturday because it's nice with a bunch of friends, and they're like, well, we're distance. I'm like, people are losing their jobs, because this is what science is telling us is our best hope. And whether right, wrong, or indifferent, we won't know, for months whether or not this is the right thing. But this is what we collectively as a country, and our elected officials and our science leaders, this is what we're buying into, and this is what we're doing. So, either do it, like for blood, or we need another solution. But the halfway, that and that's, I think that's where we have to look at, as a country, what's our purpose as a country. And I think every individual should look at what their purpose is. Every business should be looking and taking this time to say, what am I really doing? Like, what is my purpose? And I think there's some real excitement around. Some companies are really going, like Bauer, the hockey company is doing protective masks for hospitals. Tesla with their thing, Dyson with the ventilators, GE, Ford, every big company is starting to go, how do we get solutions? Our entire scientific community is all banded together to tackle this. And I think if we started looking at every one of our issues as a society is not as, it's a problem for the government to solve. It's a problem for that, is to say, how do we as business, how do we as private citizens, how do we take how are we accountable and take responsibility for our country and our country's actions? And I mean, like, how do we in Quebec look out for the needs of those in Alberta who are just being decimated in the oil patch, completely decimated? And that's a big discussion. What do we do with the East Coast with the fisher, the trade out there and all these things? What do we look at in the farm industry in the prairies? So I think as a country, we have to stop the division of us, and that's, we'll never get anything done if we're divided as a country. If we're divided as a people, and I mean the entire planet, if we come together, and I think that's where business plays a big part of it, I think, is looking at it and going, we're all interconnected. So we saw that with China. The minute China went down, it's like, well, it's China. All of us stopped being able to make things because we rely on that supply and trade from China for our computer chips or the little piece of rubber. So even though it's made here, some of the core components come out of China. So the more global we are in terms of our business, I think the more global we have to look in terms of our politics, and stop being divisive in our politics, and realizing that if any one of us goes down, that we all kind of spiral the same drain, just because we're so interconnected as a species now.
Yes. And, I think there was that interconnection, and that it is a global pandemic. It is a global problem, and it will have to have a global solution. And we are interconnected, and there isn't a going back. You're not going to go back in time and then become, no, disconnected humans. That's done. So we have to figure out ways forward that actually, elevate that, innovate it, and leverage those connections to learn from each other and find solutions fast. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is that solutions and sort it out together. And how can we share more information that is relevant and provides that for people? And one of the things you touched on earlier, and we'll close this off fairly quickly in a couple of seconds here. One, I really appreciate your candor and being willing to chat with me today. Thank you so much. But you talked about women being displaced and going back from the shelters that are closed and going back to, abusive situations. And I have seen, and I've spoken to several people where that is happening more and more. And I think we could be better at coming up with solutions for these families. Again, we have high rates of availability for occupancies, hotels, motels, whatever that looks like. I think we should be bringing those communities together and figuring out some of those solutions so that we're not putting more people at risk. The other thing that I saw is there's a new addiction crisis
Yeah.
because more and more people are sitting at home abusing and using substances to numb how they feel during the
Mhm.
experience. And if you don't have a sense of purpose, you're going to do a lot more of that. And so these are the kinds of things that we want to start to create solutions now, right now, versus wait for, oh, the numbers are up and here's all the people that were at risk and this is what happened in those populations. I think there's some opportunity for all of us to dig into that, and mental health is got to be a priority for people.
Yeah.
And going forward, 100%.
I think it's a huge priority. How do we put systems in place for at-risk people, be they women, be they youth? One of the women I've done some work with on her board of Gender Bridge, she posted on LinkedIn talking about a frog emoji and using that. So if you're in an abusive relationship and you need that, just send somebody the frog emoji. And that was something that she started championing on LinkedIn to say, if you send me the frog emoji, I'm calling the cops and saying there's a woman that needs help. But at least then,
Thank you for
know
about that. I didn't know about the frog emoji.
it's she just posted it, and I don't know if she came up with it. I think she did. But again, it's if anything we've learned in the this post Me Too era is that so many women are at risk. And when we now put people together and at homes, and it's not just women, obviously, men, but kids, everyone. And I think the only way, because so much of our systems are breaking down, the only way is for us as citizens, especially if you're sitting at home and you don't know what to do and you're on social media and you're just waiting for the government checks to kick in, and it's kind of like a long spring break. That These are the people that need to be kind of catalyzed and inspired to say, reach out to your neighbors, reach out to everyone and say, hey, I want to check in with you. And if someone is struggling with addiction, if they're struggling with, be it alcohol or any of the other things or whatnot, it's to say, hey, just the act of reaching out is enough to start those conversations. And we know mental health is a huge issue in the country.
There is a online support for those communities. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of
Yeah.
online meetings and a lot of things happening to connect people. And now that I know about the frog emoji, I'll make sure that if you're listening to this podcast and you know someone
I'll share her post with you on LinkedIn, and you can share it on hers, on yours. It's getting to the end of the day, but I'll make sure that you have that on your LinkedIn.
We also have people doing, creating, products and services using 3D printers and helping to create, safety gear and equipment for frontline employees or
Yep.
employees that require some extra support, like our grocery store employees and things like
Yeah.
that. So much going on. We're going to be posting it on all of our social media, how you can connect. Trevor, how do we connect with you and with Corporate Connections and CC Canada Cares?
Well, corporateconnections.com is our global website. That's an easy way to reach out to us. We're also pretty active on LinkedIn, so any messages on LinkedIn, it's easy to find us there in terms of that. And then I prefer, as opposed to mass, it's just one-to-one, and getting to know people. And part of my job is making sure, again, we have the right people in our community and that are coming in with the right things. So it's really I think a curated group of leaders that are not only just trying to do their business, but it's also about creating meaningful change, either in their community, their businesses, or just their lives. So, but yeah, find us on LinkedIn, find us on the web at corporateconnections.com.
Or reach out to me, and I'm happy to also make the impact.
Or reach out to one of my favorite members in Toronto, Christine Nielsen.
Happily. So thank you so much for being on the first Reboot Real session of the Coach C podcast. You're going to hear a lot more from us. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram at Coach C Official, Contrast Results Group on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And you can always find me on LinkedIn as Christine Nielsen. It is spelled the Danish way, Nielsen. It's not like the chocolate bar. So we're looking forward to hearing from you and really having more deep dive, meaningful conversations that make an impact. Thanks again, Trevor, for joining us today.
Thank you, Christine.
I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Coach C podcast.